Thank you very much, Connie. I've got about 10 minutes, so I'm going to sort of give some fairly broad impressions about the changes that we've seen in London. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background briefly that's important to understanding the situation there. So in 2000, the Greater London Authority was created. This is important because it's a London-wide planning body. We hadn't had that since the 1980s. And the new mayor, Ken Livingstone, was largely responsible for transport. So we had a figurehead who was responsible for transport. In 2003, Ken Livingstone introduced the congestion charge in London. Alongside this, we had bus priorities, bus lanes, and pro-walking policies, so a lot of reallocation of space to walking and buses. In fact, 30% of central London road space was reallocated from cars to buses and walking, and it worked. People started using public transport more, in particular. Cycling came a little later in terms of planning. So in 2008, Boris Johnson announced the plan to build London cycle superhighways. And in 2010, we got our cycle hire scheme. We also started to see superhighways opening, but they were not initially any good. Initially, they were blue paint on the road, aimed at telling commuters where to go. They were not protected space. And people were dying on them. There was a lot of opposition, there was a lot of criticism, and it led to change. In 2013, the Mayor's Vision for Cycling was published in Boris Johnson's second term. This was a document that said, we will create an Olympic legacy for all Londoners in terms of cycling. We will broaden cycling to a much wider demographic. And last year, we saw the opening of the north-south and east-west cycle superhighways. These were high-quality, protected space in the heart of London. And to be honest, in 2013, I wasn't sure we'd ever see that, but it has happened. Much still remains to be done, of course. We also have other projects called Quiet Ways and Mini Hollands, and I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. But the big, iconic infrastructure has gone in central London. Just to give you a sense of the change, this is generation one of the cycle superhighways. That is not really inviting most people to cycle in an environment like that. But that was version one. It was quite expensive somehow, but that was the first version. By contrast, this is the cover of the Mayor's Vision for Cycling. So in 2013, we saw this, and many of us thought, it's amazing we've got those drawings, but it will never happen in reality. But now, if you go to London, much of London is still a problem for cycling, but you will see that. You will see something that looks basically like that on the way to Big Ben. This gives you another flavour of the difference. So this is near the Tower of London, and that's what it looked like above. If you were there with children, you'd be on the footway. You wouldn't be on that road. Now, there is an environment where parents can cycle with their children in safety near the Tower of London and between the Tower of London and Big Ben. One thing that has been crucial in achieving this change has been a shift in mindset, a shift in how we think about cycling and cyclists. I think that's really important because it wasn't that people didn't know how to build before. It was that they were building for the wrong audience, for the wrong thing. The old approach to cycling safety and risk very much focused on cyclists and cyclists as a problem. That therefore, if there were deaths and injuries, the old view was, well, were the cyclists protecting themselves? Were they wearing helmets? Were they wearing bright clothing? You know, could the driver see them? And we have a strong tradition in Britain of individual solutions for cycling safety, of making, as you may have noticed if you've visited Britain, making people wear helmets, high visibility clothing, training them so they will be confident to ride with lorries. And this whole approach was associated with blaming cyclists. If a cyclist was injured or killed, often the newspapers would say, were they wearing a helmet? What were they doing that was wrong? So we have that whole legacy that is a real problem for us. But we've started to shift it in London, I think. In London, Transport for London now talks about Vision Zero, talks about reducing road danger, so changing road designs, changing driver behaviour, changing vehicle design. And there is a move towards collective solutions, which I think is really important, seeing cycling safety and comfort as a collective thing. It's not that individuals behave dangerously or individuals are fearful. It's about creating a safe, comfortable system for people cycling. And so increasingly we're focusing on infrastructure particularly, but also some other changes, like the enforcement I talked about earlier, like having road traffic offences actually dealt with in a proportionate way, thinking about the deaths and injuries that they cause. And it's been also associated with holding politicians to account. So having Ken Livingstone, then Boris Johnson, and now Sadiq Khan as the Mayor of London, responsible for transport as a big part of their portfolio, they are being held to account for cycling safety, and that didn't really happen before. Also making sure that cycling was politicised, seen as a political issue, that if individual cyclists were injured, inconvenienced, felt unsafe, that this was not a problem for them as an individual. This was a problem for politicians to solve. So this was the message by a pressure group called Londoners on Bikes in 2012. They said, vote with your bike. And 20,000 people, I think, signed up and said, we will vote with our bike. So it actually started to be seen as a vote winner, potentially, doing something for cycling, not as just a vote loser for some eccentric, lycra-clad extremists. It was actually something that could be important in a mainstream political sense. So some of the achievements that have been achieved. So as I say, London is still far from perfect. We've seen some big changes, but much of London is still problematic. But in 2012 and 2016, mayoral candidates committed to funding cycling, to supporting cycling. And cycling funding is now substantial. In London, it used to be about €1 per person per year. It's now more like 12. So we spend much more serious amounts on cycling. The new cycle superhighways at their best are international quality. Go and look at the embankment if you're in London. It is very good infrastructure, I believe. We also have, in outer London, cycling remains low. Outer London is suburban. It's often low income, and cycling levels there have not reached the levels we see in more central areas. In outer London, we've seen a programme called Mini Hollands, which is quite radical in a suburban context. It involves a lot of traffic reduction, potentially, of not letting motor vehicles just drive through residential areas to get somewhere else. It involves cycle tracks. It involves improvements for walking. And at their best, those schemes are really transformational, because they are not just putting a superhighway down the embankment, they're changing where people live, where people go about their daily business. So that's really positive. We have had less success with what are called quiet ways. These are meant to be routes along quieter streets. The problem in London, I guess maybe you have this problem, is that what are meant to be quiet streets are often really busy with motor traffic. Motor traffic uses quieter streets to avoid queues, congestion on the main roads. So often these quiet streets are not quiet. The quiet ways have suffered from governance issues. We have 33 boroughs in London which control 90% of the roads. So if you imagine a route through London on those roads could involve, 4 or 5 boroughs, and they have different political commitments to cycling. Also, what's called network assurance. So Transport for London has done some great things for cycling, but it also has a duty to keep traffic moving. Traffic, legally, includes bicycles, but often in practice it doesn't. So network assurance tends to be seen as keeping motor traffic moving. So every time a quiet route hits a main road, we have a problem because we cannot slow down the motor traffic on that main road. So we still have a lot of problems, which really stem from car dominance. We're getting more schemes, more superhighways, more other schemes. The quality is often mixed, but that was the case before. You get some good stuff, you get some not so good stuff. Overall, I think we're still going forward, but it is still a long process. So I just wanted to finish with a few learning points, what maybe a few things that have seemed important for me. Firstly, coalitions have been really crucial. Coalitions between planners, politicians, policymakers, advocates, academics, people learning from each other and also learning from other countries. It's been really important for us to see what they do in the Netherlands and Denmark. But for me, it's also been important to learn from other countries like USA, Canada, Latin American countries and Germany, which are facing some of the same problems that we face and how we deal with those political problems. Data collection, data analysis and visualization has been really important. So being able to visualize the flows of cycling across London bridges or the potential for cycling in outer London, visualization, data analysis has been really important. Changing infrastructure and culture, as I said before, are both really important. So one of the things that the congestion charge helped do was delegitimise driving. With the congestion charge in place, driving into central London became seen as something that was a bit odd, increasingly. Why would you do that? You have other options. You know, there's some good other options. It's been important for us to say thank you for good infrastructure. You know, suddenly, when the good infrastructure appeared, it really mattered that planners, policymakers and so on got emails saying, now my children can cycle on the embankment. Because as a transport planner, a policymaker, what you mostly get is people complaining, mostly. And so having people say thank you, I think heard people say that was amazing. I got so many thank yous, particularly when they are under pressure when doing these things. People have sent death threats to council officers and so on who are putting in cycling schemes. They've got a lot of aggression. And finally, pressure over deaths has been really important for us. So when there's been a cycling death, saying this is these things are the result of policy and planning. It can be changed. This has been really powerful. London and Copenhagen have similar amounts of cycling. London's much bigger, but mode share is lower. Copenhagen usually doesn't have a death. London has 10 or 12 a year. So, it is about policy and planning. But ultimately, that's not enough. We also need to talk about comfort and inclusivity, because there are many places, as I mentioned, in outer London with no deaths because no one cycles, because the environment is so terrifying. So getting change in those environments involves more than pointing to deaths and saying this needs to change. We also have to, in outer London, also it's about linking with walking and talking about creating better neighbourhoods for everyone, for children and so on. That's been really important too. So thank you very much.